Go ahead and start. Greetings, everyone, again from wherever you're joining us, and welcome to today's webinar called Specification Driven Development, and what it is and why it works where the BDD fails. My name is Kanat, and I am a senior quality engineer at Cisco Corporation here in Houston, Texas. Also, one of the organizers of this meetup group, along with Yusuf and Elaine. I think they are also in this call today. So before we get started, as usual, let me briefly introduce our group again and welcome our new members who joined us recently. So this Houston Software Quality Engineering meetup group with currently 257 members is for software quality and assurance professionals to meet monthly. The vision of this group is educate, train, coach, and mentor each other on software quality. And basically our goal and our mission is to build a big community of software quality professionals and help each other to accomplish something bigger and build better product at our companies. So for those who are attending to our events for the first time, I'd like to go over a few notes on how to participate on today's session. So the duration of this session will be around 1 hour. The speaker will be presenting roughly about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session, which is 15 to 20 minutes. And if you have any questions, please wait until the Q&A session starts, and you will be given a chance to unmute your microphone and address your questions. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Also, I'd like to remind you that today's presentation is being recorded, and we will be posting all recordings to our YouTube channel. And for those who couldn't join the call, or anyone who wants to rewatch the session and make notes from the presentations and the slides, you can do it in our YouTube channel as well. I'll post this. I'll send the link to YouTube channel in the meeting chat today. The last but not least, at the end of the event, we will be again randomly selecting winners for event participant gift. And last time, I think Haley won the gift, and we'll see who will be the lucky participant today. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker for the session. His name is Artem Golibov. Artem is the co-founder and CEO at the company called TestRigger. So Artem and his team helping companies to reduce the number of the human efforts spent on the testing and improve the test coverage at the same time. Artem has a wealth of experience, 20 plus years in the IT industry. And I'm really excited to have Artem here with us today. So without any further ado, Artem, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Kanat. All right, so let me start sharing my screen. I would need a permission
to
do that.
1 second, Artem. Let me quickly make it as a co-host. You're good to go. You should be good now.
Not yet. Still don't have it yet.
Oh, sorry. I think I need to pick one. Can you try now? Awesome.
Yes. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can, Artem.
Perfect. Okay, let me set things up. And today we will be talking about specification driven development and how it's different from BDD and why BDD. We have seen BDD failed in a lot of cases, and how SDD helps to address those issues. Specifically, we will be a couple of things in there. So first of all, of course, the definition SDD, then we'll talk about how exactly is it different from both BDD and ATDD. And like if you'll have a little bit of time, I might get into more details and become a little bit more specific, show maybe some screenshots and demos. So a couple of things in here. So basically the definition, what you can get out of it, and maybe some examples. Okay, so what kind of test automation are we talking about? Well, test automation is across the board. There's a lot of stuff that you can automate testing of, right? You can do web application, mobile application, APIs, IoT, different devices, cars, what have you. So lots of different stuff, and techniques and approaches might be different. And I want to point out that today we will be specifically only focusing on web, mobile, and API automation, mostly on web and mobile automation. So I'll just be mentioning the API here and there and comparing different approaches for API and how they're dramatically different from web and mobile. I did not have experience with IoT devices and cars, and if you're doing something like that, might not necessarily be applicable, or maybe I have just no idea. Okay, so first of all, a quick reminder about BDD. So the BDD is behavior-driven development. There is a wonderful book on that from John Ferguson Smart. And like this is the picture which he shares. And basically, BDD, unlike TDD, is more of a meta framework compared to TDD. And the TDD is very simple, right? TDD is you're just writing tests, usually unit tests, before you write code. It's on a lower level. We're talking about interfaces where you write an interface, it doesn't work, and then you write the code and your test works. Very simple. So BDD is completely different. It's a meta level. Now we're talking more in terms of requirements, and the process is order of magnitude more complex than that. So basically, what BDD is talking about, as you all very well know, is just the process of encouraging collaboration. In general, it encourages collaboration between business people, QA organization, and engineering in order to achieve the same goals faster and keep everyone on the same page. And the process usually goes as first of all, everyone gets together and kind of outline business rules, get to some shared understanding of what needs to be done. Then, like some people, be it business analysts or QA, QA professionals can be writing specific specifications and wireframes and such. Then QA engineers would start automating something or write a framework. Engineers would be actually writing code. After engineers wrote the code, then people in QA automation can actually complete their work usually. So they now have all of those XPath IDs and everything else, and then you can write the validation, get and provide feedback to regional stakeholders, and just repeat. So all of that is a process that people have been using since invention of BDD. What was that, 2006, as far as I remember. All right. This is all great and all, and indeed it does have value, and it has been helping a lot of companies. What's the problem then? So why do anything else in there if everything's so great? Well, it's because basically like there are now better ways to do things, and you start hitting actually walls with that. So then again, here I want to start distinguishing between different types of testing. If we BDD can encompass any kind of testing whatsoever. And if you're talking about API testing is very straightforward. API by definition has a contract, and when you write tests, you fix that contract. And in general, when you publish an API, the contract is fixed. So usually people very rarely change an API. So that makes it very simple. You can actually write the code, the testing code before actual API is complete, and do everything ATDD style, and it works wonderfully. No problem at all. The challenges arise when you work with start working with web and mobile automation. So first of all, you're kind of a little bit out of luck. So it's very hard and slow to build test automation for web and mobile, as you very well know. It's a very large challenge, and like you run into a couple of issues in there, such as related to test maintenance and speed of test creation, and we'll talk about it in a second. So all of that results to 70% of all tests are executed manually in 2021. So remember that magical picture in here. Well, like people, at the end don't have enough bandwidth and speed to automate everything. So what ends up happening is that majority of those specifications are, even if they are executable by manual QA or QA engineers, which have to execute them manually because there's no bandwidth to actually automate those. So this is a very shocking number. So this is one. Second, there is another issue in there. So we have talked with a lot of directors of QA, and they ask them, why don't you guys use BDD? And they have told us that they tried and they have not seen any value in there. So basically, at the end, their team still have to write unstable Selenium code and deal with all of that issues with Selenium, changing app and all this kind of stuff. And we have not seen enough of the value to justify adding additional effort to build specification in addition to writing the code. So this is a kind of a feedback we have seen so far across the board, because the companies we talk to have and our statistics differs from what is done for open source. Supposedly, people who did analyze GitHub repositories noticed about 50% of all open source projects use some kind of shape or form of BDD. In our case, we have seen less than 10% of the companies actually do that for their internal projects. So your mileage may vary in here. And yeah, so you get all kinds of issues out of that, right? So because you're testing manually now, so you're missing bugs in production because it's impossible to retest everything quickly enough, and it is very hard to build new automation. It's insanely slow with Selenium and Appium. And basically, like here, forget about test triggers. So your blue line is what you would want your test cases to be automated, and the number of test cases created. And red line is what can you actually automate. And what the graph shows is that the more tests you have with a fixed number of QA engineers, the more time you spend on maintaining existing tests. So even you would wish you would build more tests, and you technically have a capability to, but you cannot, because most of the time is now wasted into test maintenance. So that is the largest issue we have seen across the board environment. Anyway, so all of these issues and stuff like that is good, but how's that anything to do with SDD? So SDD, specification driven development. I'll just read the definition and we'll discuss then how does it relate to everything else. Specification driven development is when your user story or your test case is executable before the feature is released without the need to write a framework or code to deal with the details of implementation. So meaning that no Selenium period anywhere before you create a story or after or during. So what what we're talking about is, again, if you get back to BDD, so these executable specifications which come out of communication with business owners and engineers and stuff, they are executable out of the box. And yeah, but the reason like why we didn't have that before is because it just wasn't possible. So now we have frameworks where it is possible, and you can actually do that, and you can write your specifications in English at least, and keep them executable. So now this is a kind of a process illustrating that. So basically it eliminates, it's the same picture, everything is the same, it just eliminates a need to automate it. Skip that because executable specifications just are executable by definition on their own. I mean, mind you, this is basically could have been done with API, with BDD altogether from the get-go. Using ATDD, it's the same thing, so there is not really much difference. So here, what we're talking about is web and mobile automation. Again, to reiterate, no coding in there, right? And whatever specification is, it just runs. In particular, another issue with BDD, which is being solved in here, is multi-step process. In a lot of cases, you can't just write specifications and make them executable before code is complete. You cannot always achieve ATDD. You have to basically usually like this Cucumber and frameworks like that formulate the specifications, then wait until engineers are done, or at least give you some kind of a way to hook up to elements, such as they will provide you IDs, or we will say, hey, we will use this kind of parameters like data, test ID, attribute, or what have you, in order for you to be able to proceed and build the code. So it's a multi-step process, and usually you can only complete after the code is actually released. And that makes it automation post factum, whereas in SDD process, it is preemptive in TDD or ATDD style. So you are completing like your test through specification before engineers deliver the feature. And then you can run, make sure it fails. And once the feature is delivered, then you can validate and see that it actually did work through the specification. All right, so let's now talk a little bit about ATDD. Doesn't that sound familiar with how ATDD works, isn't it? How is that different? Well, it is very similar indeed. So ATDD is basically saying that, hey, you write test code before your engineering are done with delivering the feature. And indeed, in some cases, it is possible. It is definitely possible in a lot of cases with the API, because the API is based on contract. Usually it is easy to agree with engineers on the contract and then proceed to building tests before engineering is done. It is order of magnitude harder with web or mobile application development, because you cannot always achieve that from that level of communication and the process where you can actually finish building the stuff before engineering are done, because you're usually dealing with details of implementation. That's a problem with ATDD for web and mobile. You have, even if you're dealing with IDs or data test IDs, attributes, and stuff like that, you are still dealing with details of implementation. That is something which is not visible to end user, and therefore it is not part of specification. So therefore, like, there is a disconnect between a specification and how you code it, because the specification says click on the button submit, and your code is saying find button by ID, submit order, and then issue click to that button. So there is a disconnect. Not only, of course, that potentially creates issues on its own, right? There is no guarantee that engineer who updates those tests going forward keep that description of the test in sync with the actual implementation of the test. But my point, what I'm trying to make here, it is, number one, it is a code you would write to do it, and number two, it relies on details of implementation. So that those are exactly those two differences between SDD and ATDD, which are otherwise very similar. So what SDD says, first of all, it's a higher top level process in general. It is kind of a subset or improved version of BDD. So it involves a lot of stuff which BDD have. It just eliminates need to automate. And compared to ATDD, it's basically saying, hey, the specification itself should be executable. Number one, so there should not be a code in there. And number two, there should be no using of details of implementation. So that means that everybody who have been automating like APIs should have been most probably have been using SDD if they were following BDD process. I'm pretty sure if you use a BDD and ATDD for API automation, that is SDD by definition. However, for web and mobile automation, that was a challenge. Anyway, so let me share some small example in here and show you what I'm talking about exactly. So one of the systems which can execute SDD type processes for web and mobile applications is TestRigger. And basically, this is how it looks like. It's all plain English, a subset of plain text. So as you can see, it's all readable and all in English, and it describes the stuff from end user's perspective. And if you need to refer them to some element which is not unique, you're using relative locations or other attributes from end user's perspective, which can be described in executable specification. So basically what does it mean is that this specification is indeed executable. Let me show you exactly example what I'm talking about in here. So remember this clicked on the right of this address. This is exactly what we're talking about here, right? So we enter it as some zip code, and there is a list appears, or could be table or what have you, and you need to refer to the select button, which is corresponding to certain particular location which you know is set up for your test. So because those locations might vary, especially in the testing environment, you want to, in order to keep your test stable, you want to refer to certain specific element. It could be for other use cases for that, but point being is you can, when you're saying executable specification, you should be able to express it in English. And the way it works is that as soon as you can express something in English, it should be executable. In this particular case, it's a relative location. And you can say, hey, click on and select button on the left of this. So mind you, this is not something unique, right? Selenium, starting from 4.0, have relative locations, and there were other framework which had them before. Point here is that it is in English now, right? So people who are business analysts, like product managers, and in general, potentially non-technical people will be able to understand, in some cases create, definitely provide a feedback on those executable specifications, and make sure they are reflecting indeed what we expected. So added benefit being is that there is no miscommunication or misunderstanding of requirements from QA engineers in comparison to business analysts. Because business analysts, when they formulate the requirements, they might mean one thing, and then when QA engineers actually implementing them, they can understand that differently, right? And even though it says one thing, the actual test doing another thing, which is kind of normal, we're all humans, and it might be just a difference in understanding between one and another. Two people understand the same things differently, even the same language in some cases. So this is like when you make the specification itself executable, that helps to eliminate that problem as well. Now there is no gap between understanding from a business analyst perspective and QA engineer's perspective, because it is literally the same specification literally is executed itself, is executable in its own on its own from its own perspective. And that way, if something doesn't work, then let's say it doesn't execute, it's usually abundantly clear what is going on, right? Because hey, it either specification needs to be updated, it does not reflect the new functionality or some updates, or it is abundantly clear, hey, like the specification is correct, but then the product does not behave as per specification, and there is no gap between these different understandings between people. So basically, point being is like what SDD, when we're talking about SDD, SDD in the first place is just a new terminology to reflect that updated process, which, mind you, a lot of people have been using already. for things like API testing, and I'm sure in a lot of other cases. Or I'm sure if you work in some military-like organizations where everyone is perfect and engineers can give you like everything you need. So maybe you already have created something, some kind of a system like that, where you just like already achieved that even beyond API testing. Like this, what we introducing in here is we saying, hey, there's a new terminology to reflect this new process. And by the way, it now makes sense to have this terminology because whatever was only possible for API testing is now possible for web and mobile testing as well. Not just only API testing. Okay, so that is it for me. So I made it a little bit shorter. And I would love to hear your questions.
Yeah, so now we can move on to Q&A sessions, I guess. So you guys, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Yes, Partha Samal. You can unmute yourself and then ask the question.
Yeah, sure. So, Artem, how do we compare the front end and back end in this case using test trigger?
What can you elaborate? What do you mean?
So normally using Selenium, right? How do we do the testing? We use a functional testing and we do a database connectivity and also compare the UI or the web with respect to the database. So just to ensure that the backend data, whatever is being populated, is in sync with the front end information, what is being shown. So using this tool, how do we do the similar comparison of a front end and back end? I know you are doing more of the front end part, but how do we ensure that whatever information is being displayed in the front end is accurate or correct?
Well, you can do the same thing in test trigger. So you can just refer the database and say, hey, execute this query and gets the result, and then use this result to compare it to whatever is in UI or something like that. However, I want to point out what you're talking about is integration tests, and like what SDD process usually talks about is end-to-end tests. It's a little bit of a difference, and where I apologize, I forgot to mention that. So if, as you remember, there's like unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests, right? I mostly talked about end-to-end tests. You could like implement a similar process to integration tests, but I'm not sure that that would even be a part of BDD in general, because now you're talking about more testing details of implementation. So it's more like closer to unit testing than end-to-end testing. So business analysts probably wouldn't care. So what we would usually tell you is that, hey, we need to make sure that this functionality, after user did this functionality should work like that. And usually there is a way to validate it through the API or UI by calling API or executing UI. But again, so if you need for whatever reason to connect to database, it is possible to do so.
Okay. And how do you test internationalization or localization? Since you mentioned this tool kind of advocates more in English language. So if it is in a different language, how does it cater those needs?
Yeah, excellent question. It's actually could be a topic for the whole different speech overall, right? So there are several ways how you can, let me pull up some screenshot, right? Let me find something more complex. This one, for example. So basically, there are multiple ways how you can refer to elements in here, right? You can, let's say you want to click on this update button, you can refer to it by IDs and stuff like that, or you can refer to it by text because it's saying update. Like basically two ways in general, right? So what when you are writing unit tests or you're writing something like Selenium tests, you would usually hook up onto something like ID or test data ID or what have you in order to refer this element in case of internationalization testing. Or like internationalized application, right? You go through all of this kind of stuff. So I would argue, well, you can do it with test trigger as well. It's just, I would argue it's probably a suboptimal way to do that because you're not really then testing from end user's perspective anymore. Again, so you're getting down to details of implementation, moving this test closer to what would be an integration test as opposed to end-to-end tests. So alternative way of doing that is through data sets. So you can still go through all of those, all of your steps in your tests, and you can click on this button by update. But this text update could be a parameter from the data set, and you could have a different data sets per language. So you could have the default data set could be for English language, but then you can also have data set for German, for French, for Spanish, what have you. And this way, I would argue that it is a better testing because I understand it tests a little bit more, but it tests from end user's perspective. But by a little bit more, I mean like, hey, you're not only testing that your functionality works, you're actually testing that also that internationalization works, right? That is actually, that button have this German word for update. And I apologize, I don't speak German. I don't know what it is, but let's some kind of German word saying update in here. So, and you can do both with test trigger. I would just argue that you should use data sets as opposed to referring to elements by some detail of implementation, such as an ID or database ID.
Okay. So how do you handle data which is like secure based or more of masked data and integrate it into test trigger? Like because here we are using data on the fly, I think more of. So how do you handle such kind of critical data or companies from retail or banking or financial sector who have specific account numbers or personal user information which they want to mask? How are you going to use that data and incorporate into your system?
Several approaches to that. It's kind of similar to how you would do it with Selenium, right? It's the same, exactly the same challenge. It's about the same approaches basically would apply. So what I was about to say is just across the board, that it's not specific to any tool whatsoever, including test trigger in particular. So it's basically, well, first of all, if you're talking about banking, we have not yet seen any bank which would use us as use test trigger as a SaaS. So what's happening is that they deploy the whole system, all of that, on premise, and then just use it within their own network. That's it. So everything is within their own network, and everything, like all the processes related to test data, is handled appropriately. So regarding the test data, you can specify test data in here, and then you can like if you want to get data from external location, you can override the test data as such. So you can literally get test data from a vault, from secured vault, and basically override it dynamically when you call triggering test trigger retest, and it will then execute the tests, and this data won't be exposed anywhere. Because it got from the vault directly to execution.
Okay, got it.
But I mean, it's you usually would pass some kind of testing environment, be it staging UAT or what have you. It's not that bad usually. Like it's not real PII.
Example that you showed where you were writing in the English language what the actual steps are. How does that translate to any kind of assertions? As in when you click in account settings and you want to see the username of that user, where is the step definition that's being generated?
You write it in English. It's not generated. So this is a step definition. So you're validating that this checkbox is unchecked. Is for example, you can also validate that. You can say check if page contains, I don't know, shopping at 298 King Street. And it will validate that the page somewhere contains this information. But in general, like anything you can think of, what you can validate, you should be able to do that. So all kinds of texts and values and states, colors, anything. And even if you want to go really hardcore, you can even validate CSS properties. If you want to check things like if your text is striked out or bold or whatever. But like there's basically tons of it. Whatever you can think of which would apply for validations, you should be able to do it. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. That's cool. Thank you.
Okay, great. Farfar and Sima, you still have your hand raised. Do you have more questions?
Artem, we have one question in the group chat. I think Mr. Miller was from you, right?
Yeah, I can see that. Let me read it up and I will answer it. So how to deal with ambiguity of English language? For example, a difference between and, or versus or, and or versus or. An example, subtitles of would, could, ought, may, shall. Yeah, well, excellent question. So basically, test trigger as a system does use natural language processing, and mind you, it supports huge number of ways how you can express stuff. But it is, of course, it is limited. Of course, you can, if you really search hard, find some ways which are unsupported, or you have to specify a more specific ways. For example, in this and or versus or, maybe you should only use or like subtleties. I'm not sure what this word mean, but like you using like auto, it doesn't work. You should probably like upgrade to more descriptive language. The test trigger is a descriptive language, descriptive and prescriptive. So you wouldn't say ought, you would say it should be like this. Check that it is like this. So it's very prescriptive. Do this, check that it is like this. It's not ought versus should, because should, ought and should are not prescriptive enough. So ought and should means that it probably should be, but not necessarily. And if it doesn't, we don't care. This is, well, we believe that it is not what you would usually want, because if you're creating a test, you would usually want to be prescriptive, and you would usually want to make sure that the specification which you are outlining is either true or false. And if it's false, then you want to be notified. You want to see some kind of failure somewhere. Well, mind you, you can use conditional stuff. You can say, for example, like, I don't know, if you don't need to click search anymore, you can say if it exists and stuff. But the point what I'm trying to make in here is that you need to understand that artificial intelligence in 2021, and mind you, 2022, I believe would be the same, and for foreseeable future, is not on the level of a human intelligence. And therefore, it is technically impossible to support like everything, because that would mean that we would need to build a general AI and level of AI on a human level, which is not technically possible in 2021, literally. So that therefore it is a subset which is as close as is technically possible in today's technology to express same thing. And mind you, like we constantly monitor how people are trying to express themselves. If we see that we are missing something important, when we add support for it, and there are a lot of examples of that. And of course, there is a huge difference between how you would do it in programming language, how versus how you would say it in English, and we support the English approach versus just a fixed engineering approach. However, of course, it is to a certain degree. Like, of course, there are some stuff which is out there. You would argue that you could say things like that, but it's not yet, or might not be supported on test trigger. However, what we have seen, we have statistics actually around that. And what we have seen is the following. So number one is how it is written is good enough for non-technical people, business analysts, product managers, I don't know, someone else, understand what is going on. So at least we can understand that. Out of the box, it's a big deal. If you look into your Selenium code, we would not be able to understand. That's a difference. So this is one. And second, like people, a lot of people are just coming in and start to write test trigger without reading documentation, and it just works. We have, moreover, we have seen even with complex cases where people are automating away maps, mind you, like Ubers and stuff, and like they are fine about 83% of the time without referring to documentation. So do we have to sometimes? Oh yeah, well, of course, from time to time we want to I want to check out like how it's going to be in there. But in 83% of the time, we will just guess and it just work. But yeah, so hopefully I replied this clearly enough for Steve.
All right, guys, we have 7 more minutes for our time window. So if you guys have more questions, I think we still have time to answer those. If not, we can move on to participant gift selection. So anyways, I would like to say huge thanks to Artem Golibov joining us from Bay Area. And Artem, thanks for your time and effort and sharing your knowledge with us, with our community. And huge thanks to you again.
Yep, my pleasure. And I would like to end up on saying that I'm not a robot or AI, so I'm a human. Don't be discouraged to connect with me. Find me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email if you have any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, and you can also find Artem through the LinkedIn and get to know more about his product and how he's helping the companies reducing the time and effort to succeed in their testing. So thanks again, Artem. And let me share my